Now, after more than a month since South Africa held its national and provincial elections on May the 29th, President Cyril Ramaphosa finally announced his new Government of National Unity cabinet last night. Now, for the past few weeks, political parties taking part in the Government of National Unity have been behind closed doors negotiating in what some have described as the most difficult process in our country's 30 years of democracy. Now, the cabinet appointments will also pave the way for the 7th administration and provincial legislatures governments to begin their work for the next 5 years. So to talk to us more about these cabinet appointments and, of course, what it all entails, what it means for South Africans and the political parties involved, we are joined by Dr Sithembile Mbete, who's a senior lecturer at the University of Pretoria. Dr Mbete, good morning. Well, finally, we've reached that point where we can talk about this cabinet. Welcome.
Good morning, Sakina, and thank you so much for having me, and hi to everyone at home.
So firstly, your overall impression of what has happened here and the composition of this cabinet. Any surprises?
Not too much, not too many surprises. I think my first impression was just how well I think President Ramaphosa has managed the different groupings that he has had to manage in the composition of this cabinet. So not just the other parties that are part of the GNU, but also within his own party. In many ways, he had been presiding over a coalition government of sorts since 2018. And so the way that that also was managed, what it's resulted in, of course, for us as citizens, is a very large executive with about, it's 34 members of cabinet as far as ministers are concerned, and then I think it's 42 or 43 deputy ministers who aren't part of cabinet but are still part of the executive. So it's resulted in a very large executive, but one that broadly pleases, I think, all of the different stakeholders that are part of it. One of the things that I was surprised by, but made then complete sense, what you'd sort of seen it, was the splitting of agriculture and from land reform and rural development, and in that to really, I suppose, please the different two different parties. So John Steenhuisen from the Democratic Alliance is now the Minister of Agriculture, but then the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, who we know has always made land reform such a big concern of theirs, they have now received land reform and rural development, which, I think that was a really clever master stroke in sort of dealing with these different interests within his cabinet. When we were at the Union buildings last week now, or the week before, you and I spoke a lot around the managing and the balancing of interests, right? IFP receiving COGTA, as you can see up on screen, is a really big thing, given that the IFP is one of the parties that has been so concerned about around the more federal, or wanting to take advantage of the more federal aspects of our system. So for provinces to have a little bit more power, and of course, given that it is a party whose base is in KZN, the interests of traditional leaders are a big concern for them. So all of these, different dynamics and interests that have been managed in the creation of this executive is a really big deal. I was genuinely surprised that Angie Motshekga got the Department of Defense, got the Ministry of Defense and Military Veterans. There were some indications that Bantu Holomisa from the UDM was going to get the ministry, but he has been made the deputy minister. So it'll be interesting to see how the three, both the minister Mutsecha and then Deputy Minister Holomisa and Deputy Minister Mkungo, actually work with each other within quite a difficult portfolio, especially given the recent deaths that we've seen in the DRC of some of our soldiers.
So very interesting, as you point out, Dr. Mbete. So if we look at the agriculture portfolio, John Steenhuisen being deputized there by Nogzola Kapa, and she, of course, was the deputy minister in this portfolio previously. So she comes in knowing what exactly is going on in this portfolio, and she will be his deputy. Land reform and rural development, Zwanele Nonto of the PAC. This one, and this is where I would like your view on exactly what President Ramaphosa is doing here. You could argue that, you know, placing the PAC in this particular portfolio is a way of saying, okay, this is something that as the PAC, you are obviously passionate about. This is what one of the cornerstones of the PAC and what they advocate for, land reform. And so here is Weletu. You are in this portfolio. What are you going to do about it? Because it almost kind of takes away the responsibility now from the ANC to say, no, but PAC, you were there. What have you been able to do? What are your thoughts on that?
Indeed, and I think that this is part of I think what's going to be really challenging for some of the smaller parties within the GNU is that now you can't be just an opposition that can sort of, you know, challenge things from the outside, and it's a very important role that opposition parties play. But now you're going to have executive responsibility to actually take the decisions that you've been saying need to be taken by the government for all of this time. And so and given that the PAC's manifesto was one that was centered on land reform, on the failures of the state since 1994 to really, you know, change the situation that we have of redressing the land that was lost, but also transforming, property relations within this country. It'll be very interesting, you know, throwing this huge challenge to them. Let's remember also that for ministries that are broken up, right, that have been configured in a particular way and then they are changed afterwards, a lot of the work of the first year or 18 months of that ministry and those departments is just administrative. It's just organizing, okay, which building will we be in, which staff moves from the old ministry to the new one, how are budgets split, how are the different responsibilities of that ministry split. And so a lot of that is going to be, Minister Jonjo is going to be consumed for the first year, maybe 18 months. Both he and now Minister Steenhuisen are going to be consumed just with that organizational work before they can actually start doing any of the real kind of policy or even legal work, if that's what they want to do, if they want to change any law. And so, it's not only being given this portfolio that goes to the heart of what your party's manifesto and position since it was formed gets to, but then also having to manage that administratively is hugely challenging. And I think that this is certainly a way, in some ways, of sort of managing what could be opposing figures within his own executive.
And of course, moving to basic education, I quickly want to touch on that because I think here again, the president masterfully manages this situation, appointing as Minister of Basic Education a DA minister. So we know all of the problems in the Ministry of Basic Education, but you think of policy issues such as the Bila bill, and we know the Democratic Alliance had indicated that they are willing to go to the Constitutional Court if they must, regarding some of the provisions of that particular bill. And now you have a DA minister in that portfolio. Also, you know, all the other detractions that the DA had around basic education. So what do you make of that appointment?
Look, I think that Siviwe Gwagube as an MP has been one of the better MPs of the DA. She's been one of the best MPs within the DA caucus over the last 5 years. She was the DA's sort of lead member in the health committee for quite some time, particularly around COVID. So the sort of the social cluster is one that she knows, that she's familiar with. And when she was in the portfolio committee for health, showed herself to be quite agile and really good at getting her head around very complex policy and legal issues within a contested space. And so I think that she is more than capable of handling the issues at basic education. But as you say, basic education has been one of those areas where the DA has had, when it was in opposition, quite fundamental differences with the ANC in government around policy and law for the basic education department, so whether that was the Bila bill, whether that was how particular policy things were being handled, engagements and relationships with the trade unions, with the teachers unions. And so now the DA's minister is going to have to be overseeing the implementation of a bill that was passed, which is the Bila bill, or being responsible for the challenging of that bill, of that act. Now it's the Bila Act, being the responsible for the challenging of the act in the Constitutional Court if other actors take it to the courts to be relooked. But you know, as the minister in a particular portfolio, you need to own that piece of legislation and defend it, right? And so how do they manage that? I think that it'll be interesting to see the relationship between Minister Gwagube and her deputy minister, Regina Maule, who's been in that role as deputy minister for a very long time, actually. And so what working relationship do they have with each other? And then lastly, you know, the Department of Basic Education is a very difficult portfolio for a minister, just because the implementing power within basic education actually lies with provinces and districts, less than it does with the ministry, right? So the minister at national level is responsible for lawmaking and policy making and kind of oversight of implementation. But the actual implementing power is with the big chunks of the budget for basic education go to provinces and then go to districts from there. And so, you know, that responsibility of then coordinating quite a decentralized department is also going to be quite challenging, I think. And it'll be interesting to see how Minister Gwagube copes and manages the complexity of these very different actors in a massive department.
Very interesting, but we out of time. I have one more question and 1 minute in which to answer it. And I quickly want to touch on Gayton McKenzie, because I'm looking at the ministers from different parties and where they've been placed, because I think this is where Ramaphosa was really masterful. So Gayton McKenzie gets the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, which is not just about the fun and the games, the sports and arts and culture, but it's also got a very important role to play in social cohesion, Dr. Mbete, fostering social cohesion.
It's a hugely important role for fostering social cohesion, and we know that the PA ran on quite a divisive campaign in terms of wanting to represent a only a particular segment of the country and its demographic. So how Minister Mackenzie manages that dynamic in this portfolio, because you can't just run a single ethnicity or single race campaign in this ministry. As you say, it's very important for social cohesion, but also it's a very important ministry for the economic aspects, right, of sports, of arts and culture. We saw yesterday we won, South African artists won at the BET Awards. So does he manage this portfolio with that understanding is going to be very interesting to see.
Dr. Mbete, wish we had more time. We don't, but I trust that there'll be more opportunity somewhere down the line. Thanks so much, Dr. Sithembile Mbete, Senior Lecturer at the University of Pretoria, talking to us about the political implications of this new cabinet of the Government of National Unity after they were announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa last night.